Hey, my name is Anais. I'm the owner of Sin Spiciana. Tonight we are going to make some candles, and we're going to do it right in the kitchen. So if you don't have the presso pots, the digiboils, all the high-tech gear, I'm going to show you how to do it right in your kitchen. So tonight I am making 2 candles using a brand new wax that I've never used before. This wax I got from the Flaming Candle is WG454. This is not a sponsored video with Flaming Candle, but I just wanted to kind of play around with new waxes. So I picked up this wax, and what I'm gonna do is use my same vessels that I normally use. I'm using my cocoa butter cashmere by the Flaming Candle as well, because it's a fragrance oil that I know how it acts with the wax that I normally use. Again, I'm using my regular white vessel. That's a 10-ounce vessel. And I'm also using a 7-ounce jar as well. I normally use these 2 jars, so I don't want to add too many extra variables if I did not need to. So the only thing that is going to be new in my process is the wax. Now, what you want to do is just make sure that you know what the manufacturer says how to use the wax, how hot to heat up the wax. I heated up the wax in this video, about 190. It was supposed to be 185, and then I just let it cool down, but you'll see that later on in the video. So another tip is I like to put a paper towel on my scale, because when you're taking the wax off, the pouring pitcher is hot. So sometimes the heat can affect your scale. So I always put a paper towel down. And also you want to make sure that you have a really good stirring utensil, because you want to make sure that you incorporate your wax and wick, not your wick, your wax and fragrance oil together. You also want to make sure that you have a thermometer to go ahead and know the temperature of your wax. I don't like to use the infrared because it takes a surface temperature, so I like to use a candy thermometer so I can know what that internal temperature of the wax is. Now, if you have a infrared thermometer, just make sure you're stirring around your wax so that it can kind of get a better reading on that. So as you can see, I put the paper towel down. Now, one thing I'm not going to do on here is I'm not going to use a double boiler method, because I'm going to stay right here in the kitchen. But again, if you are doing this for the very first time, please use the double boiler method, which means you get a pot that you're not going to cook with, and put water in there, and then put your pouring pitcher inside of the pot. And don't fill the pot up too much to where water can accidentally get into your wax. You don't want that. So here I'm just opening up the wax, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Excuse me. So after I opened up the wax, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my scale and go ahead and proceed to go ahead and measure out my my wax. Now again, I'm doing 17 ounces because my white jar is 10 ounces and my other jar, my clear jar, is 7 ounces. Again, I do all that calculation at CandlePal. It's super simple, but if you guys want me to show you how to do it manually, please just comment below. I can always show you that manually. So here I'm just going to go ahead and measure out my wax and my fragrance oil. Now, the one thing that you want to do, and the one tip that I can give you, is to always make sure you're measuring everything out. You're not using cups, you're not using tablespoons or anything like that. You want to make sure that you are using a scale and either measuring out in grams or ounces. Those are the 2 measurements that I've known a lot of other candle makers use. I measure everything out in grams. I like grams better. But if ounces works better for you, go ahead and use ounces. There's nothing wrong with that. The other thing that I could suggest is know how much fragrance oil your wax can hold. This one that I'm using right now can hold up to 10%. The wax that I normally use for my candles and for my candle line holds up to 12%. So again, you want to know, and you want to make sure you know how much fragrance oil can you put in there. With today's recipe, I used 17 ounces of wax, and then I did my fragrance oil at 9%. Now, the other thing is not always more fragrance oil, the stronger your candle is going to smell. Sometimes the less is more in this case. So I know that I did 9%. So if I have to play around with the wicks and I'm like, I'm still not getting the hot throw that I want, then I know maybe I need to dial back my fragrance load. And sometimes if you dial it back, your candle will actually smell stronger. Now, the other thing is you want to make sure you have the proper wick in there. You want to make sure you check your wick size to the jar that you're using. Anytime that you are changing up your jar, you want to make sure that you check for the wicking size. Anytime that you change up your fragrance oil, you want to make sure you test to make sure that wick is still compatible with that fragrance oil. So normally what I use is a double boiler method if I'm going to use my stove. You don't have to have a Presto pot or anything like that. You can use your stove. I will strongly suggest you use a double boiler method, which is you using a pot that you don't cook in and you put water in it and you set that your pouring pitcher inside of the pot and let it melt the wax that way. I don't have a pot that I don't use for cooking. So what I'm going to do is do it this way, put it on direct heat, and I'm going to watch it like a hawk. So I'm watching it. I'm making sure I'm constantly checking the temperature, make sure it doesn't overheat. My instructions for this wax says to heat it about 185, and to add the fragrance oil at 180, and then pour it into the jars at 150. The other thing to keep in mind too is when you are pouring your fragrance oil into your melted wax, it's going to drop that temperature. And then when you take it off the fire or take it off your heating source, your temperature is going to start dropping. So what I would suggest is while you're heating up your wax, to go ahead and get your fragrance oil measured out. So I had just bought these beakers. I don't know why I was holding the beaker like that, but anywho, just bought those beakers. So I sprayed it down with some alcohol and wiped it out because I don't want any dust particle inside of my fragrance oil. So I make sure everything was wiped down, everything was clean, still checking on the temperature because we don't want to forget about that wax because we don't want to burn that wax. So I'm going to go ahead and measure everything out so that when that wax comes off, I can go ahead and just incorporate the fragrance oil with the wax. Again, I'm going to have to wait for the wax to cool down just a tad bit because you want to heat the wax up to 185. You want to pour your fragrance oil in at 180. So you're going to need that temperature to drop just a little bit. One other thing that I do like to use is a pipette because it helps get the accuracy of the fragrance oil. What you don't want to do also is put too much fragrance oil into your wax because what it can do is that wax can seep out of the wax. The fragrance oil can seep out of the wax and it could cause a fire. So you want to make sure that, again, you know exactly how much fragrance oil you're using for that specific wax and that you measure it out correctly. If you're gonna to me, this is just my opinion. If you're gonna measure out your wax in grams, measure out your fragrance oil in grams as well. Keep everything the same so nothing changes. Again, I use that pipette to either pour a little bit in or take a little bit out just to make sure it's as accurate as possible. With this recipe, my fragrance load was supposed to be at 39.79. It's at 40. Those couple of extra grams isn't really going to hurt because when you pour the fragrance oil in to the wax, a little bit's going to stay behind. So it's not going to, that little bit over isn't going to, hurt or anything like that. So now I did let the wax get a little hot. It's at 193, I believe it was. So I'm just going to have to go ahead and let it cool down. Now, in the wax that I normally use, I heat it up to 200 and immediately add the fragrance oil. It works for that particular wax. And I will do a video on the wax that I normally use. But for this one, because it is my first time using it, I want to get it down as close as possible to what it's supposed to be. So I'm going to wait on the wax to get as cool as close to the temperature that it's supposed to be. And then I'll do another video as well as if the candles act differently being poured at a hotter temperature or lower temperature, or what the different factors are. But for now, I'm just trying to follow the instructions as close as possible. And as you can see here, I try to get every drip drop. But again, some is just going to be left behind. So again, I didn't pour exactly the exact amount, but majority of it got in there. Some is going to be left behind. So it's okay if it's over just slightly. Don't stress out about that part. Now here, I'm going to stir for 2 whole minutes. I'm going to speed it up because I know you guys don't want to sit here for another 2 minutes watching me stir. But stirring, making sure that the fragrance oil combines well with the wax. So this is a 2-minute stir. So now we're going to go ahead and check the temperature of the wax. Now that we've incorporated the fragrance oil into the wax and we've stirred for 2 minutes. And as soon as we get a good read on it, I'm going to go ahead and pour the wax and the fragrance oil into the jar. So now that we know that the temperature is down where it's supposed to be, I'm going to go ahead and grab the 7-ounce jar. And this is where you want to pour accurately, especially if you're creating a business. Because if you see here, when I get ready to pour, this jar is going to be slightly over, but it's going to cause my next jar to be slightly under. One thing you want to do, you want to make sure when you are labeling your candles, you have the accurate amount. So for me, I am always measuring as I pour. Yes, I can eyeball it, but also I want to make sure that my pours are accurate. So I always put the candle jar on top of a scale and pour it out that way. So this is at 7.14 ounces. And I do measure my candles out in ounces versus grams. So this is the time that I do use ounces versus grams. But for my raw materials, I do measure them out in grams. And so again, I put the new jar onto the scale. I clear it out here. And that way it reads 0. So then it's only capturing the weight of the wax and fragrance oil. And then you're going to see here it's slightly under. So if I can read that correctly, it is at 9.73 or 74 ounces. It needed to be at 10 ounces. So because I'm not selling these, it really didn't matter. But I still went ahead and tried to even it out. And then I realized it's not going to be even anyway. And because I don't know exactly how much I'm taking out. And I was just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. But This is how I make candles. If you guys want me to do another video on something else, or if you have any questions about the process, please, please, please leave it in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and I'll be making more videos.